Hey everybody, this is Kirsten here. Welcome back to A Better Way with Kirsten podcast. Thank you so much for being here. Before we get started with today's topic, by the way, we're going to talk about two important hormones, insulin and cortisol. Before we get there, please, if you could do me a favor, that would be absolutely wonderful. So if you are watching this on YouTube, please make sure that you subscribe to this channel and also leave it a thumbs up because that way also, when you subscribe, you are not going to miss any of the episodes that I'm publishing here. You will get a notification every time I publish something. And if you leave it a thumbs up, it also helps the channel to grow. More people will find it. So that would be really, really amazing. If you are listening to this podcast through a podcast app, let's say Spotify or iTunes, please leave it a review and a 5-star rating. And also share this with your friends and family members because my goal here is to really help as many women as I possibly can through this absolutely free podcast. And I hope that if you have found this podcast and this information here helpful, that you will help me to share the word with others too. I know there's so many women who need to hear this advice, and this is truly my passion. This is what I want to do. I want to help them to get out of this what seems like never-ending dieting cycle and show them the way to healthy fat loss, muscle building, strength gains, all that, so that they can feel truly, truly healthy and fit in their bodies. So this is my big goal and my ask. If you could help me with that, I would so much appreciate it. The other thing, if you're not a member of my Fit and Fueled Facebook group yet, please join. This is a really fun group. And right now we have a challenge going on in this group too. So I did a challenge in June, and now in January we have another challenge, again, completely free challenge. And the winner, in addition to fat loss results, she will win $300. So this is pretty awesome, I think. And I do it every now and then. Also, between the challenges, it's not completely quiet there. We are definitely doing things. I'm often sharing what I'm buying from Costco, what foods I'm making, some tips and tools for healthier fat loss, muscle building. It's a fun group. And so if you're not a member yet, please join and bring a friend too. Let your friends know about it. I really would appreciate it. So this is all for that. And now let's dive into the topic of insulin and cortisol and how they impact your fat loss, weight loss. But one more thing, actually, I also want to clarify something that I feel like a lot of people are struggling with to understand. So when it comes to healthy fat loss, there are two things that matter, two major things. Of course, more than that matter, but two major things, and they are your calories and they are hormones. So if anybody says that only one matters, then it's not true. So you may find people who say, yeah, it's only about calories. You just have to eat less than you did before. You have to put yourself into calorie deficit, and this is all that you need. And yes, you do need a calorie deficit, but there's another side of it, which is your hormonal health. So at the same time, you need to have healthy hormones. Somebody, though, might say that only hormones matter. You can eat however many calories you want. As long as your hormones are healthy, you're going to lose weight. And this is not true either. Both matter. Because if hormones didn't matter at all, then all of these women who are chronically eating super low calories would lose weight. But how many examples do we have of that? And I've shared also in this podcast where somebody could be eating very low calories and not losing any weight because they are just really drained their hormonal system. They have just been in a calorie deficit for such a long time that their body has become not responsive anymore. So we need both. We need a healthy calorie deficit, and we also need healthy hormones for a healthy fat loss to occur and something that you can sustain. Okay, so now with that out of the way, let's focus on insulin and cortisol. And insulin, of course, when you hear that word, a lot of people automatically think about things like blood sugar regulation, diabetes, things like that. And it is true, right? Insulin is definitely playing a big, big role in this. But maybe a lot of people don't know exactly what the connection there is. For example, you may have heard that, yes, for healthy fat loss, you have to keep your blood sugar in check, or you have to eat regular meals to keep your blood sugar in check, or you should definitely always start your meals from your protein and fiber if you want to keep your blood sugar in check. And you might be thinking, okay, cool, yes. But you may have never thought, why does it matter so much? What's the big deal here that my blood sugar stays in check and I'm like minimizing those huge spikes and I'm keeping the spikes or the rises a little bit more moderate, and I want to make sure that they come back to my pre-eating level. Why does this even matter? So hopefully what I'm going to tell you next will help to clear this confusion up a little bit. So insulin, of course, as you probably know, is a hormone that is released from your pancreas, right? So when we eat something, then insulin is the key that goes to your cells, open the cells, and now helps the sugars enter those cells, right? If everything works perfectly, then this is exactly what happens. And so where do these sugars that we eat now get stored? Mainly in your liver and in your muscles. So these are the two main places where the sugars get then stored because the insulin has opened the cell. Okay, everything works perfectly. But now when these stores are full, liver, muscles, they're full, then the sugars get stored as fat cells. Okay, so in other words, if we just eat so much, we overeat, and we overeat like very highly processed carbohydrate foods, then this can easily happen. Now we have just too much, and the body also releases too much insulin as a response. But now the bad thing is that your cells, they are almost like they're not hearing that insulin knocking on the door anymore, right? They're just not hearing. And this is what's called insulin resistance. So your cells are not letting that those insulin do its job, and sugars won't get into these cells. So now you end up with high insulin levels. So if you're overeating, if you're eating highly processed carbohydrates too much, right? I think a little bit is fine, right? Especially if you are otherwise in good metabolic health. Yeah, a little bit is fine. But if it's just too much, if there's excess of everything, now you have this extra insulin in your system, right? And the too much sugar in your system that doesn't know where to go because it cannot get into your cells, right? And this is how we put ourselves into this fat storing mode. We are not in fat burning mode anymore. We are in a fat storing mode, and this is exactly what we don't want. So that's why it is so important to eat the right things, eat them in the right order so that this situation doesn't occur, right? So you want to eat your meals in the right order. So you want to start from fiber and or protein, right? One or the other or both, you can have them. And then leave the carbohydrates towards the end. I'm actually going to get into, the tips and solutions a little bit later in the episode, but this is the main thing that you want to do so that you don't create this situation where you have this massive overflow of sugars and then this insulin, right? Also, if you eat like a big chunk of dessert and you didn't eat anything before that, you didn't eat any protein or vegetables before that, but you just on an empty stomach you ate like a bunch of sugar, then this is definitely a situation where this will happen, that you now have all these extra floating around in your system. It doesn't know where to go, and it gets stored in your fat cells. So I think that should help you to understand why maintaining this healthy blood sugar level and insulin sensitivity do matter so much for your weight loss and fat loss. Okay, now this was insulin, the basics of insulin. Next thing, let's talk about cortisol. Okay, so cortisol, of course, is known mainly as the stress hormone, but I will say that it's a little bit simplified. Cortisol is very important. That being like mainly stress hormone, it doesn't mean that it's a bad thing or that we don't need cortisol. Actually, in small doses, in right doses, cortisol is very helpful. It has anti-inflammatory properties, and it actually helps you to burn body fat if everything is under control. If you have these like small releases of cortisol and they don't last forever, they don't you don't have this overflow of cortisol, then everything is under control. Everything works perfectly. Now, in large doses, it becomes problematic. And this is where it's like the name stress hormone is sort of more fitting, right? So what happens if we have too much cortisol? We're going to talk about that first, and then what causes this situation. Well, in too high doses, then we're going to increase our body fat. It's just going to increase your body fat because there's a couple of reasons. In huge doses, like unmanaged cortisol, actually will slow down your thyroid function. So this is a pretty common thing. So when your thyroid function is slower, always your metabolism will be slower, right? The thyroid is the main regulator of your metabolic rate, right? Slow, sluggish thyroid typically means that your metabolism is lower, your metabolic health is poorer. And we have talked so many, probably most episodes, not most, but like so many episodes here that are done are all about metabolic health and how to raise your metabolism, speed it up. So if your thyroid is low and slow, your metabolism will also be. Now, in big doses, cortisol is very inflammatory, very, very inflammatory. So if you are under a lot of stress, whether it comes from, physical sources, mental, emotional sources, same thing. Body's response is very similar. Similar, it causes a lot of inflammation. So if you're always like achy, you're in pain, you're brain foggy, puffy, wearing, feeling all kinds of kind of weird inflammatory symptoms like that, this can be definitely because your cortisol is too high, it is unmanaged. And also in high doses, if you get too much cortisol in your system all the time, you definitely will have more cravings, right? And they can be harder to control. And the worst combination is if you have high insulin, if you have high cortisol, and also if you have something called NPY, which is neuropeptide Y. So this is something that makes you crave even more high fat and high sugar foods. So this is a really, really bad combination. And this is the combination that will help your fat loss to it just makes it so, so much harder. Okay, so back to cortisol. I talked for a second, a couple of other things here, but back to high cortisol. So what are these things then that cause these high cortisol states? Well, stresses, all kinds of stresses on the body. And when I look at, the typical person that I work with who has maybe elevated levels of cortisol, and by the way, you don't even have to test it. You can tell, right? You can tell based on, their metabolic rate, you can base level of inflammation, the cravings, the mood, the brain fog. You can tell that. So lots of dieting will definitely do that. If you're starving yourself, if your eating is very sporadic, if it's not regular, then that's a stressful thing on the body. And also too intense exercise, too much long cardio will do it. So these are more the physical things, but I will say absolutely 100% also mental, emotional stress. Very, very powerful ways to increase your cortisol if you are chronically under stress. And this is a topic I could probably talk about hours, but I try to keep it brief here. For example, if you put so much pressure on yourself, if you never take a break, if you don't believe that you're worthy of certain things, you feel like you always have to prove yourself to everybody, if you're putting too much on your plate, that's figuratively speaking, because a lot of these people are actually under eating, but figuratively speaking, you just stress your system with too many things and thoughts. They become your beliefs. So if you're always in this constant negative cycle, then this is a really good way to keep your cortisol high, to keep your inflammation high. That also means that if you have high cortisol, you have actually increased the blood pressure, typically very, very common because your body and your brain, everything is on high alert. You have decreased serotonin production. You suppress your immune system. So if you're getting sick more often, which I know happens to a lot of people who are often dieting, they get sick often. And part of it is because they are under constant stress and high cortisol all the time. And they also have more pain. So these are the things that happen when the cortisol goes unmanaged, right? If we hammer our bodies, we starve our bodies, and we have these thoughts that are very stressful, that are very self-critical, that don't let us rest, then this puts you in this place of high cortisol state. Okay, so like I mentioned, the worst combination when it comes to your hormones, specifically talking about insulin and cortisol, if you have a fat loss goal, then the worst combination is constantly elevated insulin combined with constantly elevated cortisol. So you want to minimize these things. You want to bring back down to a normal, healthy level. So they both should spike at times, right? And then they should come back to normal, healthy levels. So how do we know what are some physical symptoms? So that you have high insulin and high cortisol in combination. Well, very, very common one is belly fat gain. Super common one. You have more fat receptors in your belly area, 4 times more, I believe, than anywhere else. And so if you're now in this fat storing mode, which we talked about happens when you have excess insulin and also high cortisol, then the belly is where more of it gets stored. So this is very common. And in addition to that, actually these fat cells in your body can start making their own cortisols. This is kind of like adding more stuff to that, right? Making it even a little bit worse. So now the second thing, if you have high insulin and high cortisol all the time, then you are probably going to lose muscle because you are in this state of breakdown, right? Metabolic breakdown, muscle breakdown, let's put it that way. So your metabolism slows down. And with that, if you lose your muscle, this is not a healthy place to be for fat loss. You always want to maintain as much muscle as possible. Okay, so it sounds like there's a lot of stuff, and oh my God, like I have to get to work on that. And, as always, don't approach anything with a panic or like, holy shit, like this is too much mindset. There are so many things that you can do to help yourself if you're dealing with high insulin, if you're dealing with high cortisol. So let's talk then. What are some of the things that you can do? And you have heard me mention these things before too on the podcast. But I want to go them over again and make sure that you are doing most of these things fairly, most of the time, all the time. Of course, everybody has a day when they have, a little bit of more sweets, or they have just like a piece of cake and they didn't eat protein before. Okay, every now and then this stuff does happen. But what I'm going to tell you now is what you should be doing most of the time to keep these things in check and to make your fat loss easier for yourself. Okay, so the first thing is to eat regular meals. But that means that don't graze all the time. Like don't like snack all day long. So you want to eat, let's say, typically I'd say 3 to 5 meals for most women is good. And I do want you to eat breakfast. I do recommend this for many women, most women, I would say. Also, eating breakfast will slow down your cortisol response early in the morning. So eat that, eat your breakfast and drink your coffee with it. Don't drink caffeinated, especially caffeinated coffee before you eat. So these two should go together. If you say that you're never hungry, then it is very likely a sign of slow metabolic rate. So you want to work on that. So you want to start your day with something, even if it's a little snack that is high protein, has some fiber in it, have at least something. And when you do it over time, your body's signals start to wake up again, and you should start getting a little bit hungry in the morning. And this is something that should be actually excited and happy about. You're not supposed to not have hunger until 1 p.m. This is typically not healthy. Okay, so eat regular meals, but don't graze all day long. Make sure that you still have breaks between your meals too, right? Eat protein and fiber at every meal. This is very important to have that healthier insulin response. So the fiber and protein at the start of your meal will help to slow that spike down a little bit, and it doesn't go as up. So it is kind of like a buffer, right? So eat your fiber and protein first, and then typically you get some fat with your protein anyway. And then you're going to eat the carbohydrates towards the end of your meal. So this should be the order. If you want to have dessert, I think it's fine to have a dessert once in a while, but have that after you have eaten your meal. Don't have just, a piece of cake on its own. I think it's even worse. I don't know if it's worse, but it's equally bad is to have just like a glass of wine without having eaten anything. Also not a blood sugar friendly thing to do, and also can definitely spike your cortisol at the same time too. Then I mentioned emotional stress, thoughts, and beliefs. So, what you can do when you feel overwhelmed, you can take breathing breaks. I do that very often myself. You can meditate. You can do things that calm your system down, settle your system down. You can put your hand on your heart if you feel overwhelmed. You can tell yourself, like, okay, relax, everything's good, positive self talk. Also, you may have to go a lot deeper. You may have to look into your trauma. So if there's something that is constantly putting you to this high alert state, there's something that may have been unresolved from your past, and you have to eventually look at it. If you don't want to look at it, you're like, oh, I'm just going to deal with it. I just eat well and exercise. This stuff is not going to go away. You're just running away from it. So if there's something that you haven't faced, it is super, very, very, very likely. I know this from experience, unfortunately, that you eventually you have to look at it, because these things can keep you on high alert. And mental stress has amazing power to do the same thing as physical power when it comes to creating high cortisol state when it comes to creating lots of inflammation. Again, topic that I would like to talk about a little bit more in the future, but please, please, please start paying attention to that. Your fat loss results are not only depending on your exercise and your food choices, even if you eat the most blood sugar friendly foods, if you're not dealing with your emotional stressors, if you're never giving yourself a break, if you're always self-judgmental and critical, you're still going to struggle. So deal with that. The next thing, of course, restful sleep helps you to lower the cortisol levels, and it does make your insulin sensitivity better, definitely. And also find ways in which you are increasing your inflammation and manage them. So this can be obviously good diet, healthy diet, mostly real whole foods, less processed foods, less processed carbohydrates. I know December is probably the time of the month for a lot of people, time of the year for a lot of people when there were more, processed foods, sugar, carbohydrates, wine, stuff like that. But now let's try to, if things went that way, and believe me, they did for me too, try to just slow that down a little bit and focus on healthy foods again. Whole, real foods, always thinking, did it come from nature? Yes, it did. Well, this is a really good food for you to eat. And this has nothing to do with diet mindset. It's like, oh my God, I can't have that piece of candy. Obviously, you can. You can. But this is for your health, right? So think how can I help my health here? And also body composition goals, obviously. Then also how you manage your inflammation is to do appropriate amount of exercise and the right amount of exercise. So like I said, you don't want to do tons of high intensity stuff, like daily high intensity stuff or long duration cardio all the time too. You want to do more exercises, workouts that are like you lift weights, you lift them and then you put them down and then you rest. That's why I always say you got to rest at least a minute between your sets, up to 5 minutes. You got to sit down and rest and then you go again, right? So this is how you exercise right. And this way of exercise also helps you to put muscle on you. And also slow walks. Slow, relaxing walks are really, really great to manage your inflammation, manage your cortisol too. And rest more, give yourself some time to relax, take some downtime. I talk to a lot of my clients who are really hard on themselves. They just can't allow themselves to take a break, and this is a problem. So you have to be okay with not doing something every minute. Okay. And inflammation, big cause of inflammation is of course alcohol too. So if you are drinking multiple times a week, you'll notice it, right? You notice the next day. Most people notice, and usually the older we get, the more we notice that, oh crap, I don't feel so good. It is different than it was in your 20s, probably. And if you are drinking, let's say once a week, twice a week, you're definitely feeling more than that. Absolutely. It is very inflammatory. So keep that in moderation. I always say, save your alcohol for special occasions if you really need to. And, get like picky with it. Think like, okay, is this occasion really worth it? Like, do I want to put my body through this? Because your body is going to struggle. It has to remove the toxins. It needs to clear the system, and you can actually start absorbing your nutrients only after your body has gotten rid of this toxin called alcohol. So you have to be mindful of that and think, is it really worth it for me? And sometimes it is. Sometimes it absolutely is. Just like, with chocolate or piece of cake, I'm never going to say you can't have it. I'm never going to say I never have these things. I do, but you have to be mindful and prioritize and think what matters to you more. Is it worth it for me? This is what I always want to ask. Is it worth it for me? Maybe like having a glass of wine in a really good company, fun. Yeah, let's do it. But is it like, okay, random Wednesday night? Should I be drinking? No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Okay, so this was it about insulin and cortisol. I hope that this helped you to understand why it is important to keep these two hormones managed well and how they contribute to your weight loss and fat loss. So it is really not only about calories and perfect macro ratios. It is so much also about your hormonal balance. We didn't get into other hormones today at all, but these two are really keys when it comes to your metabolic health and your fat loss too. So if you enjoyed this episode, please share this with other people too. Sign up for this challenge. Sorry, not challenge, but make sure that you are subscribed to this podcast on YouTube and on the podcast app too. And yes, there will be a next challenge that you can sign up as well. I will definitely let you know when this is happening. All right. Thank you so much for being here today with me. Have a really good day, and I see you again soon. Take care.